In the heart of rural Ohio, where dreams often whisper quietly beneath the weight of reality, stood the Millbrook Public Library, a weathered building that had seen better days. The morning sun cast long shadows through its dusty windows, illuminating the closed indefinitely sign that had become a permanent fixture on its front door. For Eleanor Hayes, the library's head librarian of 23 years, this site had become a daily reminder of what her community had lost. She remembered the exact moment 6 months ago when the county board announced the budget cuts. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. Eleanor had watched helplessly as her beloved library, a sanctuary of knowledge and community gathering, slowly succumbed to financial constraints that seemed insurmountable. The building that had once buzzed with the excitement of children's reading programs and elderly book clubs now stood silent, its books untouched, its purpose unfulfilled. That morning, Eleanor found herself doing what she had done every day since the closure, walking past the library on her way to her temporary job at the local diner. She would pause just for a moment and let her fingers trace the cool brick exterior, remembering the thousands of stories that lay dormant inside. The library wasn't just a building to her. It was a promise to the community, a promise that now lay broken. The diner where she worked was just around the corner, a place where she now served coffee instead of book recommendations. The regulars knew her story. Most of them had their own memories of the library, of their children learning to read there, of summer reading programs that kept kids engaged when school was out. They would often share these memories with her, not realizing how each recollection felt like salt in an open wound. But this particular morning felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the autumn light hit the library's windows. Or perhaps it was the unusual number of people who had stopped to stare at the building as they passed by. Eleanor couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something in the air felt charged with possibility. As she tied her apron behind the counter at May's Diner, Eleanor's mind wandered to the thick envelope she had found in her mailbox the previous evening. She hadn't opened it yet. It bore no return address, just her name written in elegant handwriting. Something about it made her want to wait, to save it for the right moment. The envelope now sat in her apron pocket, its presence like a small ember of warmth against her hip. The morning rush had begun, and Eleanor fell into the familiar rhythm of taking orders and refilling coffee cups. Her regulars came and went. Mr. Peterson with his black coffee and crossword puzzle, Mrs. Rodriguez and her grandchildren sharing pancakes before school. But then, just as the morning crowd began to thin, the bell above the door chimed, and a man Eleanor had never seen before walked in. He was tall, dressed simply in jeans and a navy blazer that spoke of both casual comfort and quiet authority. What caught Eleanor's attention wasn't his appearance, but rather the book tucked under his arm. She could spot a first edition from across a room, and this one looked particularly well preserved. The stranger settled into a booth by the window, the one that offered a clear view of the library across the street. He placed the book on the table with careful reverence, and Eleanor felt a familiar ache in her chest. How long had it been since she had helped someone find just the right book? Since she had watched a reader's eyes light up at the discovery of a new favorite author? As she approached his table, order pad in hand, Eleanor couldn't help but notice the title of his book, The Public Library, a photographic essay by Robert Dawson. It seemed too specific to be a coincidence, yet she kept her professional composure, even as her heart began to race with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Welcome to May's," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What can I get for you this morning?" The man looked up, and Eleanor was struck by the intensity of his gaze, not intimidating, but rather deeply interested, as if he were reading a particularly engaging chapter in a story. "I heard this place has the best coffee in town," he said, his voice carrying a hint of an Appalachian accent, "and I'm hoping you might be able to tell me about that building across the street." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had told the library story so many times over the past 6 months that it should have been easy by now. But something about this moment, about this stranger's careful attention, made it feel different. Before she could respond, she felt the weight of the envelope in her pocket grow heavier, as if reminding her of its presence. "The library," she managed, her professional smile flickering slightly. That's a long story." The stranger smiled, gentle and knowing. "I've got time," he said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him, "and something tells me it's a story worth hearing." Eleanor glanced around the nearly empty diner, then at May behind the counter, who gave her an encouraging nod. How many times had she wished for someone to really listen, to understand what the library meant to this community? How many times had she dreamed of finding a way to reopen those doors? As she slid into the booth across from the stranger, Eleanor felt the envelope crinkle in her pocket. Whatever this moment was, whatever this morning might bring, she had a sudden inexplicable feeling that things were about to change. The library's story wasn't over. It was just waiting for its next chapter to begin. The stranger's eyes flickered to the name tag on her apron, and his smile deepened with what looked like recognition. "Eleanor Hayes," he said, as if the name held some significance. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to the envelope in her pocket, and for the first time since finding it, she felt ready to open it. But before she could, the stranger reached into his blazer and pulled out another envelope, this one bearing the official letterhead of a foundation she didn't recognize. "Before you tell me about the library," he said, sliding the envelope across the table, "I think you might want to read this first. It might add an interesting chapter to your story." The diner's usual morning sounds seemed to fade away. The clink of coffee cups, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of conversation, all of it dimmed to a distant hum as Eleanor stared at the envelope before her. In that moment, she felt the weight of every book she'd ever recommended, every story she'd ever shared, every life she'd helped change through the power of literature. She looked up at the stranger, questions forming on her lips, but he simply nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Some stories are better read than told." With trembling fingers, Eleanor reached for the envelope, aware that she was standing on the threshold of something momentous. The library across the street seemed to hold its breath, its windows reflecting the morning sun like pages waiting to be turned. Whatever was in this envelope, whatever story was about to unfold, Eleanor knew one thing with certainty: this was just the beginning. The stranger sat quietly, his presence both reassuring and mysterious, as Eleanor began to open the envelope. Behind them, the diner's regulars had fallen silent, as if they too could sense the importance of this moment. Through the window, the closed indefinitely sign on the library's door caught the morning light, its harsh message somehow less final than it had seemed just moments before. Eleanor's heart pounded as she unfolded the letter inside, her eyes scanning the first few lines. The stranger watched her face carefully, his expression one of quiet satisfaction as he witnessed the exact moment when hope, long dormant, began to bloom again in her eyes. This was how it began, not with a grand announcement or a public ceremony, but with a quiet conversation in a small-town diner, with an unexpected visitor and an envelope full of possibilities. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest of moments, when ordinary days transform into extraordinary ones, and when closed doors prepare to open once again. The morning light streamed through the diner's windows, illuminating the scene, like a spotlight on the first page of a new chapter. Across the street, the Millbrook Public Library stood waiting, its story far from over, its future about to be rewritten by an act of kindness that would remind everyone that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that happen in real life, when someone cares enough to make a difference. The letter trembled in Eleanor's hands as her eyes moved across the page, each word settling into her consciousness like stones dropping into still water. The stranger remained silent, allowing her this moment of discovery, this private revolution of hope taking place in a booth at May's diner. 23 years of memories flooded back as she read, memories that painted a picture of what the Millbrook Public Library had meant to this community. She remembered her first day as head librarian, how the old building had welcomed her with creaking floorboards and the comforting smell of aged paper. Back then, the library had been more than just a repository of books. It was the beating heart of Millbrook. The morning sun had grown stronger now, casting long rectangles of light across the diner's worn linoleum floor. Through the window, Eleanor could see people passing by the library, some still pausing to peer through its dusty windows, others shaking their heads in resignation at the closure notice. If they only knew what she was holding in her hands right now. It started in 1937, Eleanor found herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her words. The library, it was built during the Great Depression as part of the Works Progress Administration. Local legend says that the whole town helped construct it brick by brick. Even during those hardest of times, people understood the value of having a place where knowledge was free and dreams could take flight. She paused, running her finger along the edge of the letter. When I first took the position, there was this elderly woman who would come in every Tuesday morning. Ruth Whitaker was her name. She told me she remembered watching them lay the cornerstone when she was just a little girl. She said her father had carved his initials into one of the bricks. Said it was his way of being part of something that would outlast him. The stranger nodded thoughtfully, his eyes drifting to the book he'd brought with him. Communities build libraries, he said, but libraries also build communities. Eleanor felt tears threatening to form, but she blinked them back. We had programs for everyone. Children's story time on Wednesday afternoons. You should have seen how their faces would light up during the puppet shows. Computer literacy classes for seniors every Thursday. ESL sessions for new immigrants on weekends. During the recession in 2008, we even set up a job search assistance program. People found work, hope, purpose within those walls. She glanced down at the letter again, still hardly daring to believe what it contained. But then the budget cuts started. First, we had to reduce our hours, then cancel our subscription databases, let go of part-time staff. We tried everything. Fundraisers, grant applications, volunteer programs, but in a town like Millbrook, where everyone's just trying to make ends meet. The stranger's expression remained thoughtful, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face as she spoke. Sometimes, he said carefully, the right help comes from unexpected places. Eleanor's hand went to the other envelope, the one that had arrived in her mailbox the previous evening. With trembling fingers, she finally pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat and deliberate. The story isn't over yet. Tomorrow brings a new chapter. When the final closure notice came 6 months ago, Eleanor continued, her voice stronger now, it wasn't just about losing books. We lost our community center, our safe space, our window to the world. Do you know we were the only place in town with free internet access? For some families, that meant no way to apply for jobs, no way to help their kids with homework, no way to stay connected. The morning light had shifted, and now it fell directly on the letter from the foundation. Eleanor's eyes were drawn to the number at the bottom of the page, a sum that seemed almost impossible, yet there it was in black and white. This amount, she said, her voice catching, it's not just about reopening the doors. It's enough for repairs, for new programs, for updating our entire system. But what I don't understand is, why anonymously? Why not The stranger's smile deepened slightly. "Some gifts mean more when they're given quietly," he said. "When they're about the change they can create rather than the recognition they might bring." Eleanor looked at him more closely now, noting the way he seemed completely at ease with the weight of this moment. "You're not just here by chance, are you?" He shook his head slowly. "Let's just say I'm here to make sure the gift finds its way home. The donor, he understands what places like this mean to communities like Millbrook. He grew up in a town not so different from this one, where a library was sometimes the only door to opportunity, the only window to a wider world." Through the diner's window, Eleanor watched as a group of schoolchildren walked past the library, their backpacks heavy with books they now had to get from the next town over, a 40-minute bus ride away. One little girl stopped, pressing her face against the library's window, her hand raised in a small wave as if greeting an old friend. "When we closed," Eleanor said, her eyes following the children, "7-year-old Katie Martinez brought me her piggy bank. Said she'd been saving for a new bike, but thought the library needed it more. Her mother tried to explain that $32 wouldn't be enough, but Katie just said, maybe if everyone gives a little, it'll add up to a lot." The stranger's expression softened at this story. "The wisdom of children," he mused. "Sometimes they see solutions more clearly than we do." Eleanor spread both letters on the table before her, the official one from the foundation and the mysterious note from her mailbox. "These arrived within hours of each other," she said. "That can't be coincidence." "Very little about this is coincidence," the stranger agreed. The donor spent considerable time researching communities that had lost their libraries, looking for places where the impact would be most meaningful. Millbrook's story stood out, not just because of the need, but because of people like you, Eleanor, people who never stop believing in the power of what a library represents. The morning rush had ended completely now, and the diner had grown quiet enough that Eleanor could hear the gentle hum of the ceiling fans. May was pretending to wipe down the counter, but Eleanor knew she was listening to every word, just as she knew the story would be all over town by lunchtime. "There's something else," the stranger said, reaching into his blazer once more. He pulled out a small leather-bound book, a first edition of Hillbilly Elegy. Eleanor's breath caught as she recognized it. The stranger opened the cover carefully, revealing a handwritten note on the first page. "The donor wanted you to have this," he said, sliding the book across the table. "He thought you might appreciate the symbolism." Eleanor picked up the book, with the reverence of someone handling a precious artifact. The note inside was brief but powerful. "To the keepers of dreams and doorways, thank you for leaving the light on. JDV." The realization washed over her like a wave, and she looked up at the stranger with new understanding. "J.D. Vance," she whispered. "The donation, it's from him." The stranger nodded once, his expression warm but professional. "He prefers to keep this quiet. No press releases, no ceremonies, just a library reopening its doors, doing what it does best, serving its community." Through the window, the morning sun had finally reached high enough to illuminate the library's entire facade. The closed indefinitely sign seemed to fade in the bright light, becoming as temporary as it was always meant to be. "When?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely containing her emotion. "When can we reopen?" The stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out a key ring. "The funds have already been transferred to the library board's account. The contractors have been scheduled." "And this," he said, sliding the keys across the table, "is yours. Again." Eleanor stared at the keys, the same ones she'd had to surrender 6 months ago. They looked exactly as she remembered, down to the small blue tag she'd attached to mark the key to the rare books room. "Sometimes," the stranger said, standing slowly, The best stories are the ones where hope wins out, where communities remember what they're capable of, where one person's gesture of faith in the future inspires others to believe too. He buttoned his blazer and picked up his book, leaving the signed first edition on the table. The contractor will be here tomorrow morning. The foundation will handle all the paperwork. All you need to do is what you've always done. Be the heart of this library, Eleanor. The rest will follow. As he turned to leave, Eleanor found her voice again. "Wait," she called after him. Will you tell him thank you? Tell him that sometimes the light stays on because someone cares enough to provide the power to keep it burning." The stranger smiled one last time, nodded, and walked out of the diner into the bright morning light. Through the window, Eleanor watched as he paused in front of the library, looked up at its facade, and then continued down the street, disappearing around the corner. May appeared at the table with a fresh pot of coffee, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I heard every word," she said, refilling Eleanor's cup. "Every single word." Eleanor looked down at the keys, the letters, and the signed book before her. Together, they represented more than just the reopening of a building. They represented the renewal of a promise to the community, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness come quietly, without fanfare, changing lives one page at a time. News travels fast in small towns, carried on whispers and wonder, spreading like ripples in a pond. By noon, the sidewalk in front of the Millbrook Public Library had become an impromptu gathering place. People stood in small groups, their faces turned toward the building as if seeing it with new eyes. Eleanor watched from May's diner as the crowd grew, each person adding their voice to the growing symphony of hope. Little Katie Martinez was there with her mother, clutching her piggy bank once again. This time, though, there were tears of joy in her mother's eyes as she explained to Katie that her wish had come true. Not through the $32 she had saved, but through the kindness of someone who understood the value of dreams. Eleanor's hands were still shaking as she untied her apron. May had already told her to take the rest of the day off. "Some days are bigger than serving coffee," she'd said, pressing a paper bag with a sandwich into Eleanor's hands. Now, standing at the diner's counter, Eleanor gathered the precious items before her, the foundation letter, the mysterious note, the signed book, and most importantly, the keys that felt like old friends in her palm. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. These were faces she knew, faces that had appeared across her checkout desk for years, faces that had shown disappointment and resignation when the closure was announced. Now they were transformed by something that looked remarkably like joy. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taught third grade for 30 years, was the first to step forward. "Is it true, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are we getting our library back?" Eleanor held up the keys, letting them catch the sunlight. The simple gesture sparked a wave of cheers that echoed down Main Street, drawing more people from shops and offices. Even old Mr. Henderson, who hadn't left his hardware store during business hours in 20 years, stood in his doorway watching. "The contractors are coming tomorrow," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying across the impromptu gathering. "We have funding not just to reopen, but to renovate, to modernize, to make our library even better than before." The crowd pressed closer, questions overlapping. How long will it take? Will we get new computers? Can we have story time again? Each query carried years of missing something vital to the community's soul. Eleanor found herself walking toward the library's entrance, the crowd parting naturally to let her through. Her hand trembled slightly as she fitted the key into the lock, a motion she had performed thousands of times before, but never quite like this. The tumbler turned with a familiar click, and the heavy door swung open. The musty smell of closed rooms and untouched books washed over her. Dust motes danced in the streams of sunlight that pierced the gloom through the windows. Everything was exactly as they had left it 6 months ago, frozen in time like a story waiting to be continued. "Welcome home," she whispered, more to herself than to the building, but those closest to her heard, and the whisper was passed back through the crowd like a prayer. Inside, despite the dust and darkness, everything felt alive with possibility. Eleanor moved through the space, pulling up blinds and opening windows, letting in fresh air and light. The crowd followed respectfully, their footsteps echoing in the quiet space. At the main desk, Eleanor found the old visitor's log. Its last entry dated the day of closure. Without hesitation, she opened it to a fresh page and wrote, "Today we begin again. Thank you, JDV." The news of the donor's identity had spread too, though many didn't quite believe it at first. J.D. Vance, the author, the senator, the man, who had written so powerfully about the importance of community institutions, had chosen their library for this quiet act of generosity. "But why us?" someone in the crowd asked. "Why Millbrook?" Eleanor smiled, running her hand along the worn wood of the circulation desk. "Because sometimes the biggest impact comes from helping the smallest places. Because every library is a universe of possibilities, no matter its size." The foundation letter had included specific plans for renovation: new computers, updated heating and cooling systems, expanded children's area, a dedicated space for community programs. But it was the handwritten note that Eleanor kept returning to in her mind. The story isn't over yet. Tomorrow brings a new chapter. As if on cue, Katie Martinez broke away from her mother and ran to the children's section. The little girl stopped at her favorite reading nook, a window seat with worn cushions, and pulled out a book that had been left there 6 months ago. "Can we read it now?" she asked, her voice echoing in the quiet space. Eleanor felt tears welling up again, but this time they were different. Tears of possibility rather than loss. "Not just now, Katie," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We can read it whenever you want for years to come." The afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating the space in warm columns of gold. People were moving through the stacks now, touching books reverently, remembering their favorite spots. Mrs. Rodriguez had found her way to the education section, where she used to prepare her lesson plans. Mr. Peterson stood in the mystery aisle where he'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. Each person was rediscovering their own piece of the library's heart. Near the front desk, Eleanor found the calendar they'd left behind, still open to the month of closure. She flipped it forward to the present, each month's turn representing another step toward this moment. Then she took out a pen and wrote across tomorrow's date, "Renovation begins." The foundation's representative, the stranger from the diner, had left more than just keys and letters. He'd left a promise of renewal, of transformation. But looking around at the familiar faces now filling the library's rooms, Eleanor realized that the most important thing hadn't changed at all. The soul of the place, the community that had kept its memory alive even when its doors were closed, had remained constant. A small commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. The contractors, having heard the news, had arrived early to take preliminary measurements. They moved through the space with professional purpose, but even they seemed touched by the atmosphere of reverence and joy that filled the building. "How long?" Eleanor asked the lead contractor, conscious of the crowd hanging on every word. "With the budget we've been given?" He consulted his tablet. "We can have you up and running in 6 weeks. Everything top of the line, but we'll preserve the historical character. That was specifically requested in the contract." 6 weeks. Eleanor looked around at the eager faces surrounding her. "We'll need volunteers," she said. "People to help pack up books for temporary storage, to clean, to organize." Hands shot up immediately. "I can come after school," Mrs. Rodriguez offered. "My whole class will help." she added, already planning learning opportunities in the restoration process. "The hardware store has dollies and carts," Mr. Henderson called from the back. "They're yours to use, no charge." More offers followed. The local moving company volunteering trucks, the high school shop class offering to help build new shelves, the garden club promising to restore the reading garden. In less than an hour, a renovation that could have been just a construction project had become a community renaissance. Eleanor found herself back at the front desk, watching as people formed impromptu committees, exchanged phone numbers, made plans. The contractor was right. In 6 weeks, they would have a modernized, renovated library. But something even more important was happening right now. The community was remembering how to come together, how to build something greater than themselves. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade when Eleanor finally stepped outside again. The crowd had thinned, but a steady stream of people still came by, each wanting to peek through the windows, to witness the miracle for themselves. She sat on the library's front steps, taking in the changing light on the building's facade. From her pocket, she took out the signed copy of Hillbilly Elegy that the stranger had left, opening it again to the inscription, "To the keepers of dreams and doorways, thank you for leaving the light on." She understood something profound about J.D. Vance's choice to make this donation anonymously. This wasn't just about money or books or buildings. It was about believing in the power of community, about understanding that sometimes the smallest places hold the largest hopes. It was about recognizing that every library, no matter its size, is a sanctuary of possibilities. As the evening settled over Millbrook, Eleanor could already imagine the library as it would be in 6 weeks, filled with light and learning, warm with welcome, alive with stories yet to be told. But more than that, she could see it as it had always been, a place where dreams took root and grew, where community found its center, where hope never truly closed its doors. The keys in her pocket felt like a promise, the letters like a map to tomorrow, and the book like a reminder that sometimes the best stories are the ones we write together, one page at a time, in the quiet corners of small towns where magic still happens and doors still open to endless possibilities. 6 weeks passed like pages turning in a well-loved book, each day bringing new changes to the Millbrook Public Library. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable, but what proved even more extraordinary was how the renovation had awakened something in the town itself, a sense of shared purpose that had been dormant for far too long. The morning of the reopening dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn day that seemed crafted specifically for new beginnings. Eleanor stood on the library steps an hour before the official opening, watching the sun rise over Main Street. The building behind her was no longer the tired structure of 6 months ago. Its brick facade had been carefully cleaned and restored. The windows gleamed, and a new sign above the door caught the morning light. Millbrook Public Library, where every story matters. She thought back to that morning in May's diner, to the stranger with the letters and the quiet revelation of J.D. Vance's gift. In the weeks since then, the story had spread far beyond Millbrook's borders. But true to the donor's wishes, there had been no grand announcements, no press releases, no media circus. Just a community coming together to rebuild something precious. The renovation had revealed surprises along the way. During the cleaning of the exterior, they'd found Ruth Whitaker's father's initials carved into a brick just as she'd described. The contractors had carefully preserved it, even adding a small brass plaque beneath that read, "LW 1937, part of our foundation." Some stories, Eleanor had learned, were written not in books but in the very walls that housed them. As she inserted her key into the lock one last time before the official reopening, Eleanor remembered all the hands that had helped make this day possible. The high school students who had stayed late into the evening, shelving books and setting up computer stations. Mrs. Rodriguez and her third-grade class, who had painted murals in the children's section, filling the walls with characters from beloved stories. Mr. Henderson, who had not only lent his equipment but had shown up every day to help, saying gruffly that he was just making sure things were done right. Inside, everything was ready. The new computers hummed quietly in their stations, their screens displaying the library's updated catalogue system. The children's area had been expanded with comfortable reading nooks and interactive learning spaces. The community room now, equipped with modern audio-visual equipment, stood ready for programs, classes, and meetings. Even the old card catalogue had found new life as an art piece in the entrance, its drawers filled with handwritten cards, sharing community members' favorite book memories. But it was the reading garden that had become the unexpected jewel of the renovation. What had once been an overlooked patch of grass behind the building had been transformed into a peaceful haven. Garden club members had worked tirelessly, planting flowers and installing benches. At its center stood a small fountain, its base inscribed with words from the mysterious note that had started it all. The story isn't over yet. A knock at the door startled Eleanor from her reverie. Katie Martinez stood outside with her mother, bouncing on her toes with excitement. The little girl held her piggy bank in one hand and a small package in the other. Eleanor opened the door, welcoming them into the still quiet space. "I brought something," Katie said, holding out the package, "for the library." Inside was a handmade book, its pages carefully bound with ribbon. The cover read, "How Our Library Came Back Home." Katie had filled it with crayon drawings depicting the library's journey, from the sad day of closure to the joyful renovation. The final page showed a diverse group of stick figures holding hands around the building, with the words, "Thank you, Mr. Vance," written in careful letters. "Can we put it in the library?" Katie asked. "So everyone can remember?" Eleanor felt tears welling up as she nodded. "I know exactly where it belongs," she said, leading them to a new display case near the entrance. Inside were items telling the library's story. The original 1937 building plans, photographs from throughout the years, the closure notice that had hung on the door for 6 months. And now, Katie's book would join them. As Eleanor arranged the handmade volume in the case, she heard more voices outside. Looking through the front windows, she saw that a crowd had begun to gather, not just the usual library patrons, but what seemed like the entire town. They stood in respectful groups, waiting for the official reopening ceremony that would begin. In less than an hour, May had closed the diner for the morning so she and her staff could attend. She stood near the front of the crowd, holding a large thermos of coffee and a box of her famous cinnamon rolls. "Can't have a celebration without breakfast," she'd insisted. The local high school band had set up on the lawn, their instruments, gleaming in the morning sun. They would play during the ceremony, a student arrangement of songs about books and reading created specially for this day. At precisely 10 o'clock, Eleanor stepped outside to address the gathered crowd. The autumn air was crisp with possibility, and the excitement was palpable. She held up the keys, the same ones that had been returned to her that morning in the diner, and felt the weight of the moment. "6 months ago," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "we thought we were watching the end of a story. Today, we're discovering it was just the beginning of a new chapter. This library has always been more than just a building full of books. It's been a place where dreams take root, where minds grow, where community thrives." She paused, looking out at the familiar faces. "When we received the gift that made this renovation possible, it came with no demands for recognition, no requirement for fanfare. It came simply because someone believed in the power of libraries to change lives, especially in small towns like ours." J.D. Vance understood something profound, that sometimes the quietest acts of kindness can have the loudest impact. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Eleanor continued, "But the true miracle isn't just in the generous donation. It's in how this community came together to make something even more extraordinary happen. Every one of you played a part in this story, from the contractors who worked overtime to meet our deadline, to the volunteers who gave countless hours, to a little girl who offered her savings because she believed in something bigger than herself." Eleanor turned to the doors behind her. "Today, we're not just reopening a library. We're reaffirming a promise to our community that knowledge will always be accessible, that imagination will always be celebrated, that everyone who walks through these doors will find a place to belong." With these words, she inserted the key into the lock one final time. The click seemed to echo across the gathered crowd, and as she pushed the doors open, the high school band began to play. People filed in slowly, many pausing just inside the entrance to take in the transformation. The morning light streamed through the newly restored windows, illuminating the space in a warm glow. The smell of fresh paint and new books mingled with the familiar scent of aged paper and wood. Children ran to the new children's section, their exclamations of delight filling the air. Adults wandered the stacks, running their fingers along. Spines of books, both old and new. In the community room, a slideshow played on the new projection system, showing photographs of the renovation process. Each image told a story of community involvement, from the day the contractors first arrived to the final touches being added just yesterday. The last slide showed a quote from Hillbilly Elegy. "No matter how much we achieve, we can't forget where we came from." Throughout the morning, people continued to stream in and out of the library. Some came to check out books, others to sign up for new library cards, and many simply to be part of this historic day. Eleanor moved among them, answering questions, offering directions, and sharing in their joy. Near noon, she found herself back at the circulation desk, watching as Mrs. Rodriguez helped her entire class sign up for library cards. Each child clutched their card like a precious treasure, already planning what books they would borrow first. A small commotion near the entrance caught her attention. The stranger from the diner, the foundation representative, had returned. He stood quietly at the back of the room, observing the scene with evident satisfaction. When his eyes met Eleanor's, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement before slipping away as quietly as he had arrived. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor made her way to the reading garden. The fountain burbled peacefully, and late autumn flowers nodded in the breeze. She sat on one of the new benches, taking in the sounds of life and learning that drifted through the open windows. The excited whispers of children discovering books, the gentle conversations of adults reconnecting with their community haven, the soft footsteps of people moving through the stacks. She opened her bag and pulled out the signed copy of Hillbilly Elegy that had been given to her that transformative morning. The inscription inside seemed to carry even more meaning now. "To the keepers of dreams and doorways, thank you for leaving the light on." Looking up at the library, Eleanor smiled. The light was indeed on, brighter than ever, illuminating not just books and knowledge, but the very heart of what makes a community strong. In the quiet act of one person's generosity, a door had opened to countless possibilities, proving that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we write together. As the sun began to set on that first day of the library's new chapter, Eleanor knew that while J.D. Vance's gift had provided the means for renovation, the true transformation had come from the community itself, from people who believed in the power of books, of learning, of coming together for something greater than themselves. The library would close for the day soon, but tomorrow it would open again, and the next day and the next. Each day a new opportunity for stories to be discovered, for minds to grow, for dreams to take flight. In this small town, on this autumn evening, hope had found its home again, one page at a time.